The sea had 3 colors that morning. Slate beneath the bow, poured pewter where the deeper swells shouldered in from the east, and a luminous green where the shallows began to think of shore. Oberyn Martell watched the gradations as if they were faces at court, overlaying one another in smiles and frowns. He leaned against the ship's rail with a feline ease that was muscle-true rather than performed, and at his side rested a spear swaddled in oiled leather. The wrapping kept the salt from the steel and concealed the symmetry of the weapon, a kindness to the easily alarmed. He knew how he appeared to sailors when they dared a glance. A Dornish prince in foreign waters, everything about him too deliberate to be left to chance. Even the looseness of his shirt was a decision, calculated to expose the amber light of his skin and disarm the eyes that might otherwise sharpen in suspicion. 3 days of wind had combed the sea smooth and combed his thoughts to a similar sleekness. When he closed his eyes, he could see the sun sitting on the flat blue horizon like a coin a child had delayed in swallowing, its heat pressing a taste in his mouth that was neither sweet nor bitter but desert. It was always there, the memory of Dorne, the taste and the particular tightness around the eyes when the wind carried dust. He imagined the water gardens, children laughing where the fountains threw themselves into sunlight, and held that image with its full weight until something in him unclenched. Ellaria would have loved this morning. He imagined her toes, brown and narrow, gripping the deck for the sheer pleasure of it. Ellaria had declined to come. Declined was the word she used, though she had lifted his hand to her lips as if promising hunger postponed rather than a refusal. She had heard the names as he had said them: Illyrio, Pentos, Viserys Targaryen, Daenerys, Khal Drogo, and read what lay between their syllables. "The past wears masks," she had said, teeth teasing his skin. "Bring me a good story and your body in one piece." He smiled at the water as if at a private joke. "A good story," he murmured, and the words were stolen immediately by the wind, sent with the spray to the bright-bellied gulls that skimmed like careless thoughts. The captain called directions, and the ship began her angling approach to the harbor. Pentos unfurled itself against the curve of the bay, orange-tiled roofs and domes with a pomegranate sheen, cranes lifting and lowering goods with the slowness of heavy-lidded eyes. A thin haze, smelling of tar and olives and hot metal, lay above the quays. He had been to Pentos before, though never with so much of his life focused into a single point, a sharpened promise he concealed in his easy posture. He thought of Dorne. In this he always paused, as one might pause on the steps of a temple, not out of piety but from respect for the fact that other people believed. His brother's patience was a thing with drooping leaves that still managed to survive drought and shade. You could not kill it with argument, and you could not feed it enough to make it grow in a different direction. Dorne would not be pleased. Dorne would say, "We do not decide things quickly when they are old and heavy like this." He would say, "Not yet." He would cough in the shade and look past Oberyn, out to water bright as a blade, and maybe he would want to smile, but then you would see patience again, like a shadow that had learned to have weight. And yet Oberyn had the spear, and the spear had a name, and the name was older than patience and hunger both. He did not speak that name to anyone. He did not need to. The ship's plank thumped onto the dock, and the noise of the harbor came on like an orchestra that had been waiting for the cue. The rattle of chain, the heave-saw of merchant voices, a thin thrumming from somewhere as if bees had set up a home in the ribs of the city. Oberyn let others push past him. He was not in a hurry to be recognized, nor was he trying to hide. The trick of traveling safely was not to conceal yourself but to be seen in ways that were less interesting than the next thing happening. He descended when the dock had cleared enough to allow him his own space. A boy with a shaved head and quick wrists came forward as if conjured by a thought. "My lord," he said with a little bow that was both servile and appraising. "From Magister Illyrio Mopatis, greetings. I am sent to conduct you to his manse." Oberyn looked at the boy with the mild kindness that people mistook for softness. "And does Magister Illyrio send his own child to fetch his guests?" he asked. "Or are you hired for the day, like the sun?" The boy grinned, caught out and liking it. "For the day, my lord. Sometimes for the night, if silver is dull and moon bright. Your chest will follow by porter. This way." They moved through pentos in a route that kept them in the shade where there was shade to be had. Under awnings of faded blue, down alleys bright with hung laundry that breathed the soap scent of other people's lives. Oberyn took note without turning his head to do so. The men who watched from doorways, arms loose and useful. The women whose laughter would have been dangerous if it knew how to bite. The indifferent cats, which were a city's truest nobles. The spear he carried as if it were a third arm or a song he had learned in childhood. The boy would glance at it, then glance away as if the spear had looked back. Illyrio's manse stood in a district where the street grew quiet and the stones of the houses were clean. Not merely clean but oiled, as if the city itself kept a mistress and this was where she slept. They were admitted through a gate that had probably cost more than a fishing boat, and into a courtyard where aged lemon trees made their own weather in a circle around a fountain. The fountain was new. Oberyn knew when he saw it, and it wanted to be old. A good artisan had grown impatient for posterity and carved quick, ambitious curls. Illyrio appeared as if summoned by citrus fragrance and the promise of conversation. He moved slowly and with a certain pleasurable gravity, like a man who has mastered his appetites instead of being mastered by them, though the distinction often collapses upon inspection. His hair was lion pale and carefully arranged. His beard made promises on his behalf. His belly was a comfortable piece of furniture he had learned to live around. "Prince Oberyn," he said, and his voice was a purr with coins rolling inside it. "What a warmth you bring to my house, as though it were the Dornish day itself stepping into my courtyard. If the house is warm, it is because you have kept it so with rich meals and rich friends," Oberyn replied. He took Illyrio's hands because they were offered. They were soft, and they had known more ink and oils than steel. "You honor me with an invitation." "Please," Illyrio said, and his smile deepened without hardening. "Allow me to honor you further with chilled wine and a breakfast that will offend neither your memory of Dorne nor your experience of seafaring kitchens." "Come." There was an art to being a guest, taking just enough of the offered pleasures to flatter the host without forgetting the weight of your own purposes. Oberyn let himself be led to a tiled room where geometric patterns solved and unsolved themselves underfoot. A low table waited, murmuring with little dishes of sugared almond and olives wrinkled like saints, 2 bowls of peach halves that glowed in their syrup, a platter of grilled fish so perfectly aromatic that even his self-control twitched. He ate, and Illyrio watched him with the benevolent calculation of a jeweler in the presence of a brilliant stone. When they had raised a second cup, the magister placed it down carefully and opened the door through which they had both intended to walk since arriving. "You have come on a wind of tidings," Illyrio said. "Some would call it rumor, others." He gave that pause which is the ally of intrigue. "We'll provision their ships and call it news." "I have come on a wind that smells of old debts," Oberyn said. "There is a difference." Illyrio delighted in words when they were of the kind that coiled around their own tails. "We may both be right. Shall we say, then, that a bloodline long considered extinguished is in need of warmer thoughts than the world has given it? That a prince in exile drifts like a leaf separated from its tree, and that his sister, silver of hair and not yet tested, may be a seed the ground has been waiting for without knowing it? Shall we say, to remain poetic, that there is a call whose horse steps as if the earth will forgive him if he leaves marks?" "Say what pleases you," Oberyn replied. He set his cup down. "In Dorne we would say it differently. We might say, the lion has eaten where it should not, and the desert has a long thirst. We might say, the spine of a mountain will not break if you scratch it with a golden spoon. We might say, there are 3 names that do not lose weight with the years: Elia, Rhaenys, Aegon." Illyrio's eyes softened, not with pity, which would have earned him unkindness, but with the shadow of a recognition that this was not business that could be bought or entertained into compliance. He lifted his cup as if to the names themselves and drank. "Then perhaps we can say also, the world turns, and sometimes it brings a person one seeks to a place where a person like me can be useful." "You arranged the marriage," Oberyn said. He let the statement be unadorned. "The silver-haired girl to the call." Illyrio inclined his head. "I assisted the inevitable. The winds favored the match." Winds appreciate a push as much as ships do, Oberyn said, smiling. And what wind moves you, Magister? Commerce, mostly. Illyrio answered with the cheerfulness of a man who has rehearsed his lines but knows he can charm with an ad-lib affection for interesting possibilities. Dislike of stagnation, which is the merchant's enemy, unless one sells salt fish. And I confess a fondness for gracious beginnings. Are you hoping I am a gracious beginning? Oberyn asked. He let there be laughter in the question and not in the eyes behind it. I am hoping, Illyrio said, that I have among my guests today a story so good that it calls other stories to be near it. He gestured toward another dish as if revealing a secret. Sausages spiced in the style of Lys. You will either love them or remember them. I try to do both things where possible, Oberyn said, and then, where are they? Illyrio considered preserving the mystery a little longer and then decided he liked being called upon to reveal it. In my garden under a pavilion, the prince preens and chafes, which is its own sort of entertainment. The girl watches everything and says little, yet her silence is not empty. And there is a knight who understands none of what is happening and all of it at once. He will be useful and used. He has already accepted this, though he will pretend not to know he has. Letters travel faster than ships, Oberyn murmured. Illyrio made a pleased motion with his mouth. Some letters have wings. They walked together, between clay jars painted with fish that had long and improbable eyelashes, into an orchard whose air was cooler than the rest of the house. The pavilion was draped in pale cloth that moved with the slightest insinuation of breeze. A eunuch with shoulders like a boulder stood nearby, expressionless as a closed shutter. Under the pavilion's shade, 3 figures arranged themselves in a triangle made tense not by distance but by their reluctance to admit that they were looking at each other. Viserys Targaryen wore desire like a garment, and it fit him badly. He was handsome if you allowed your eyes to forgive the signs that his hands loved mirrors more than hilt or reins. Fine-boned, with hair that was silver not by age but by inheritance, falling to his shoulders with a pretense of ease achieved by effort. A prince reduced by exile, puffed up by the memory of a world that had never belonged to him in the way he thought. Oberyn saw that in the first breath. The boy would gnaw his claim into splinters and call it victory. He would spoil wine to prove he had a cup. The girl, that was the word Oberyn used inside himself because it was the true one and because allowing truth to stand keeps the blood clear, sat with her hands folded in her lap. She was slender as reeds that grow in places where water speaks softly, and her hair, their hair, fell in a pale sheet that would be admirable on a statue and more so on a person because statues do not flinch or choose. Her eyes were not the silvery color poets spoke of when they tried to be precise and became ridiculous. They were a very pale violet, insistent upon seeing. Her dress was simple and costly in the way of dresses that have been chosen for girls by men buying futures. She did not look at Oberyn until Viserys did. The knight, older than both and younger than his regrets, wore the knight's weariness as if it were armor fitted by a craftsman who had never met him. He had the look of someone who had tried to save something once and now felt obligated to keep collecting smaller salvations. Black hair gone soft, eyes that would be blue if washed and were blue anyway, a jaw that clenched at the thought of clenched jaws. He nodded to Oberyn like a soldier, remembering that nodding was within his rights when confronted with someone who might outrank him. Illyrio's voice nudged the world into being formal. "Your Graces," he said, gilding Viserys and shadowing the girl with the title that should fit one and did not fit the other yet because men like him had not finished stitching it. Prince Oberyn of House Martell of Sunspear in Dorne. He let the honorifics be spare. This was a room that did not need a full inventory of histories. Those would be unpacked in time. Viserys took a breath that wanted to be a trumpet and came out a flute. "Dorne," he said. "Yes, I." He searched with the panic of someone who lacked maps. "A steadfast land, loyal to my father until the end. To my sister Elia." The name encountered a hardness and stumbled. "You are welcome, Prince. You are, in a fashion, kin." It was not inaccurate. It was, however, unkind to truth. Oberyn let the feeling pass across his face that he reserved for people who spoke of the dead in order to borrow the dead's authority. He bowed to Daenerys, and then to Viserys as if performing a courtesy to a courtesy. "Your graces," he said, "I bring the sun from Dorne and the salt from the narrow sea. I do not know which will be more useful to you. They keep different things from rotting." Viserys smiled because he had been smiled at. "Pentos is a lovely city," he said, as if Oberyn might not have noticed. "Illyrio has done what he can to ease our transition. The marriage will restore what was wrongfully taken." "My call," he said, and the word was a stone in his mouth that he tried to pretend was a sweet. "Has 100,000 riders. He will take me home. I will have my throne." Daenerys's gaze flinched toward her brother and then away, the motion so small that it could have been a blink. When she spoke, her voice was soft and clear, not a child's precisely, but not yet a woman's. "Welcome to Pentos, Prince Oberyn." He turned toward her with a warmth he did not need to counterfeit. "Your Grace," he said, and meant it. "If Pentos were made of ice, your hair would melt it." She smiled, small, not the display of pleasure but the acknowledgement that pleasure existed. "The sun can do the same," she replied, as if she had not meant to be clever and discovered she could be. "The sun can do many things," Oberyn said. "It can bake clay into jars and parch a man's throat until he says the truth. But ice has its uses as well. In Dorne we drink our wine warm and our revenges patiently. But we cool our peaches." He looked sideways at Illyrio. "His cook understands this in his blood." Illyrio preened for a heartbeat and then sagaciously faded behind his own servants, leaving the triangle and its new vertex to discover its geometry. The knight rose and offered his hand the way men do who were raised where such things are common and never quite learn to stop. "Jorah Mormont," he said. "At your service, Prince." "Jorah of Bear Island," Oberyn said. The name fell into a drawer in his memory and opened the one beneath. "Exile, disgrace. A wife whose appetites were more honest than she was allowed to admit. A market where men were priced by weight. You have come a long way." Jorah's mouth compressed. "As have we all." "Yes," Oberyn said and glanced at Daenerys. "Some journeys measure distance. Others measure time." Viserys made a sound that thought it was nothing and wanted to remind people that it existed. "My sister's journey is measured in destiny," he said. "Soon she will be the Khaleesi. Then the Dothraki will flow west like water and drown the usurper and all his beasts. I will mount the Iron Throne, which is mine by right, and all will be as it should have been had not traitors." He stopped himself with a visible effort, like a horse yanked hard on the bit. He smiled again, a little too entirely with his teeth. "And Dorne," he added, "will have their princess avenged. Together we will restore." He looked to Oberyn for the word and then to Illyrio. Oberyn let him search and find nothing in the air. "Dorne remembers," he said. "We remember our own. And we remember the times we refused to be tamed. We have long memories, Your Grace. This is a blessing when we are careful with it." Viserys' smile tilted. "You speak like a maester," he said. "I speak like a man who has buried people," Oberyn replied gently. Daenerys' eyes flickered to him at that, quick as birds. She had the look of someone who knew the shape of loss without having been perm. To examine it. He found within himself the desire to protect her, not because she was a Targaryen or because she might one day become powerful, but because there is a breed of very young person who looks at a world that has not given them permission to be large and begins to grow anyway. He recognized the ache of the attempt. They walked slowly in the garden, because people who must talk about futures understand better how futures behave when they are under trees and the ground has forgiven their step. Illyrio peeled away with the sense to be absent where his absence would purchase gratitude later. Jorah paced a respectful distance, not quite far enough that he could not hear but far enough that he could lie and say he had not. "You have a spear," Daenerys said at last, and her voice had that exact admixture of curiosity and caution that comes when a question feels like an exposed wrist. "It is very fine." "Thank you," Oberyn said, and only then did he unwrap it, slowly, as one undresses a lover when the purpose is not haste but respect. The oiled leather side. The spear lay in his hands like a measured sentence, the shaft of Darkheart wood. the head slender and triangular, polished to an obedience that wanted to be disobedient. At the back of the head, where it met the shaft, were fine engravings almost too small to read unless you were looking for them. Daenerys was looking. "What do they say?" she asked. "They do not say," he said. "They ask. They ask a question about what we owe the dead and what we owe the living, and whether the answer is different depending on who is asking." "And what is your answer?" Daenerys said. "On some days," Oberyn said, "I think the answer is a name. On others, I think the answer is a throne." Viserys made a soft noise, unable to resist. "The answer is my throne," he said. "The girl who was murdered, your kin, died because we were cast down. The usurper will die because we rise." Oberyn covered the spear again. "It is one thing to rise," he said. "It is another to stand. Wind alone cannot keep a man on his feet, not even a wind made of horses." "The call is no wind," Viserys retorted. "He is a storm." Oberyn inclined his head. "Storms are useful," he said. "They remove dead branches and remind people their roofs are not as good as they thought. But in the morning you will still need a town that knows how to sweep and rebuild." Daenerys walked a little ahead, her dress brushing the herbs that Illyrio's gardeners had planted for the nicety of their names and the way they looked when cut and left in bowls. The scent rose clean and persistent. "In Dorne," she said. "Are there queens?" "Yes," Oberyn said. There was no reason to pace his answer. "Dorne is governed by the law of equal inheritance. The firstborn becomes the ruler, whether son or daughter." Daenerys stopped as if she had heard music and wanted to locate where it had come from. "And it works." "It is not a recipe," Oberyn said, amused and tender in equal measure. "It is a custom. People make it work or fail as people do with other customs. But our daughters learn the taste of authority when they still have milk on their teeth. They learn that men who do not listen to them are not defending anything worth keeping." She looked at him with a hunger so startled and so fierce that it made something in him ache on behalf of a person he had met moments ago. "I have always been my brother's," she said. "This is what I was told, that he will have his throne and I will help him. That is why I will marry." Oberyn inclined his head, because this was not information. It was a confession sneaking into facts, as if the world would be gentler if it thought she was not asking anything of it. "It is one sort of why," he said. "And the other sort?" Daenerys asked. He let the air between them grow a little cool so that the heat of what he would say might feel like relief. "The other sort is yours," he answered. "Not given to you, made." Viserys cleared his throat as if dragging attention back with a hook. "The girl is young," he said. "She is awed by the prospect of being Khal's wife. It is not complicated. The Dothraki are..." He searched again. "Simple. They respect strength. I will offer it." "Will you?" Oberyn asked, and let all the softness out of his voice. "What will you offer them that does not break when they touch it?" "My blood," Viserys said, and for a moment the boy he had been shoved past the man he wanted to be. "It is dragon's blood." Oberyn regarded him with a look that had undone men who thought themselves unundable. "Dragon's blood boils promptly," he said. "The trouble with blood is that it does not know history. It knows heat and the dark." Yora made a sound that might have been masked as a cough. Daenerys looked between them as if watching men argue about a wall that kept her in or out. She had not yet decided which had been done to her. "You will ride with the Khalasar?" Oberyn asked her, and it was a gentle question, not an interrogation. "I will," she said. "Tomorrow." "And tonight?" Oberyn asked. She blinked, caught off guard by the ask. Her cheeks colored very slightly, an involuntary acknowledgement of her youth that made his protective instinct flare and then fold itself neatly behind his ribs. "Tonight," she said faintly, and then more clearly. "We will sup in the great hall. There will be gifts. Illyrio has prepared many things." "He has," Oberyn agreed. His smile barely moved. "Some of those things will be food. Some will be objects heavy enough to make you think they must matter. And some will be looks, given to you as if they were gifts. Remember that you are permitted to return those." That drew the small smile back to her mouth. "It is hard to return a look," she said. "No," Oberyn said. "It is the simplest gift to return. You merely look back, but you choose where to aim it." Viserys shifted his weight like a boy needing to piss and to to admit it. "Prince Oberyn," he said, and tried to be gracious. "It is good to have the interest of Dorne. We will call upon you when the time is right." "You will call upon everyone when your throat is dry," Oberyn said, so smoothly that the disrespect softened into an aphorism and left no bruise. He bowed to Daenerys again, slightly deeper. "If it would please you, your grace, I would like to present you with a gift of my own, but I would like to do so privately." Viserys' face arranged itself around suspicion and hospitality and ended somewhere between them. "Private?" he asked. "My sister does not." "Your sister is about to become Khaleesi," Oberyn said. "She should have at least the same privacy afforded a market ledger." Yora looked at the paving stones with a determination that said he had chosen them over the possibility of violence. The eunuch, Oberyn, had not bothered to ask his name. He knew Illyrio knew, stepped half a pace forward in the way of a man fulfilling his job description. Daenerys breathed. Her hands were as quiet in her lap as they had been at first. When she spoke, it was very simply. "I would like that," she said to Oberyn. "The gift." Viserys flicked his fingers as if shooing a very strong for its size fly. "Be quick," he said, as if time were his horse as well. "We dine at Sun's Sliding." Oberyn followed Daenerys down a corridor where sunlight and shadow played a complicated game with the lattice. He could feel Yora behind them and chose to allow it. The knight's presence was not a threat so much as an argument that had not found its words. She led them to a small room canterbare except for a window, a chair, and a chest that had been polished by the same love with which one polishes a memory one is not allowed. Oberyn set his spear aside, careful with the weight of it, and drew from his belt pouch a small pouch made of dark saffron silk. He knelt to be level with her where she had sat, and placed the pouch on her palm. She did not draw back. Her fingers closed with the exact measure of pressure they needed. She opened and shook a little, and into her hand slid a bit of hard glitter, dull until it met light. A small piece of tempered glass, circular, set into a ring of hammered gold. Within the glass, caught and preserved like a fly in amber, lay 3 grains of sand the color of the sky at noon, no bigger than sesame seeds. "What is it?" Daenerys asked, and her voice had the tiniest tremor a person gets when a thing is both less than they expected and more. "The least of things," Oberyn said. "It is a watchglass. It is used in a laboratory to observe reactions. 3 grains of sand from the water gardens of Sunspear. They are nothing. They are everything. If anyone asks, tell them the prince from Dorne gave you a trinket. But when you are alone, look at it and remember that the world is large and you are allowed to be large within it. The glass magnifies, a little. There is not magic, only the patience of looking." She raised the glass to her eye, and the sand grew, its edges crisp. 1 grain had a flaw like a thought. She smiled without meaning to, and Yora's mouth softened as if he had found something that needed no defense. She tilted it, catching a sliver of the sun, and the light made an approving halo on her cheekbone. "Thank you," she said, and the gratitude was as large as the object was small. "It is, you are right. I often am," Oberyn said, but his voice was kind and a little sad. "I have brought another gift, but it is not for you." "For me," Yora said, and looked surprised at his own voice. "For Viserys," Oberyn said. "For the prince." He stood, took up the spear, and let it rest against his shoulder. "Words. I will give him words. They are cheap, and he will not know how expensive they can become." They walked back without hurrying, because hurry draws attention and attention is a currency one should spend with a better return than this. They found Viserys where they had left him, counting his future with his eyes. Illyrio had returned, because life and business called him with equal persistence. The plaster of the courtyards was growing warmer as the day fattened into afternoon. "Prince Viserys," Oberyn said, and the title sat on the name the way a cloak sits on a man. It either suits him or it does not. A moment before dinner. A thought to accompany your wine. Viserys managed to perform magnanimity. A thought. In Dorne, Oberyn said, we say, a man who wants a thing very much should practice carrying it in his arms while empty. Then when it comes, his muscles will not tremble. He let the lesson sit where it could not be seen as condescension without effort. You want a throne. I have no quarrel with wants. But I will tell you a secret that is not actually a secret. The chair does not love you back. It will hurt you as gladly as it will hold you. It is made of iron. Iron is a simple thing. It will not forgive your softness, nor will it be impressed by your name. Viserys' face performed calculations and came up with a sum that allowed him to be irritated and appeased simultaneously. Are Dornish chairs so different? He asked, aiming for disdain. Some are cushioned, Oberyn said, deadpan. Those are different. He smiled then, and it was bright enough to distract and warm enough to disguise the small menace inside it. Practice, your grace. Practice in ways that leave no marks except where you want them. When you speak to the call, do not tell him what you will do with his riders. Ask him what he will do with their sons. Think in more than one generation at a time. The man who only thinks of his own crown will always be undone by the child who resents the weight of it. Illyrio's eyes widened with the keen enjoyment of a man who sees a talent he had not anticipated in operation. Viserys, reluctantly, nodded. I am not a fool Dornishman, he said, with the barest tremor of a person asking for grace and camo, afflaging it as assertion. I know, Oberyn said, and he let the lie be kind. You could become what you want to be, but not by shouting at the sea for being wet. Daenerys, who had said nothing, looked at the ring in her palm again. She did not raise it to her eye this time. She simply held it like a person remembering a word they intend to learn later. At supper, the hall took on the color of oil rather than of wine. There were candles enough to light the place as if it were a chapel for appetites, and the scent of lamb with rosemary could be felt in the skin. The Dothraki present ate as men do who know precisely the measure of work their bodies will be asked to perform, and who therefore will not be shamed by refusing to eat less or more than necessary. Drogo's eyes. He had arrived for this alone, with a quiet that made other people's noise kneel briefly in respect. Moved over the room and were the sort of eyes a desert has when it considers whether to become a storm. He sat as if gravity had made a pact with him. He was beautiful the way boulders are, and this made Viserys hate him for a moment without understanding why. Oberyn watched, because watching is how you keep from being surprised. He saw how the call listened to a whisper from one of his blood riders and then did not do anything because nothing needed doing. He saw how the man did not check to see if his wife-to-be was intimidated because he did not yet think of her as someone whose intimidation would change anything. He marked where the knives lay, and where there were no knives, and the men whose hands apologized for having nothing to do. He drank sufficient wine to excuse silence, and not so much that his tongue would run ahead of him like a dog. There were gifts and toasts, and the way people keep themselves important by making lists of names and objects and attaching their own names to the names of the objects. Illyrio presented a pavilion of silk that would give the Khaal's shadow a better education and a chain of coins from 9 cities, their faces smoothed by years of men's pockets. Viserys presented himself. Daenerys presented her acceptance as if it were a carefully folded piece of linen. When it was Oberyn's turn, he stood and held nothing in his hands. In Dorne, he said, he had discovered that these words could be the beginning of anything one wished to be an ending. We give a story to honor a union. Illyrio looked delighted, Viserys wary, the Khaal uninterested, Daenerys attentive as if he had lifted the lid from something that contained a fragrance dear to her and unknown. There was a man once, Oberyn said. I will not tell you his name because that is not the part that matters. He loved a woman. He loved her like shade loves a tree. He thought his love made him water, and her thirst should therefore bend to him. She did not thirst for him the way he wanted. She thirsted for something else. She drank and she left. He thought he would die. He did not. He learned to carry water in his own hands. Then he gave water to their child. The child did not love him for this. The child simply did not die. Sometimes this is the shape love takes. He let the story sit there, a small animal who might attach itself to any number of people in the room. Drogo's eyes did not change. Viserys pretended to understand. Illyrio stamped the moment with warm approval. Daenerys's chin lifted, a motion so slight that it could be mistaken for breath. Later, when the hall had warmed to laughter and begun to cool toward fatigue, Oberyn saw the boy with the shaved head threading through bodies as if they were a crowd of fish and his hands were blessed. The boy lifted his eyes to meet Oberyn's and did not blink. A messenger's look. Oberyn excused himself in the manner of men who have learned that leaving often matters as much as arriving, and stepped into a corridor full of the going to bed of small lights. The boy stood where the light ended and the dark began, not from dramatic instinct, but because people tend to stop where something changes without knowing why. "For you," he said, in a tone that suggested he understood where he sat in the hierarchy of the evening and did not require revision. He offered a small rolled parchment. Oberyn opened it. There were only 2 words in a hand as careful as promises and more useful than either. From Varys. He tasted the name, once like a man testing a drink for poison, then again because sometimes poison needs to be swallowed to work, then closed the parchment. "Tell your employer that the prince from Dorne reads, and that he is always happy to meet a man who likes birds." The boy grinned. "He will think of bells when he hears you," he said, and then, more quietly, "There is a man in the alley beyond the kitchen who does not belong. A great many men do not belong in that alley," Oberyn mused. "It is full of celery, I imagine, and onions. But I take your meaning." He dropped a coin into the boy's palm. The boy looked offended and then amused, because dignity is a garment like any other and even expensive men wear it until it frays. "Eat peaches with it," Oberyn said. "Some things are improved by sweetness." He allowed his feet to find the path to the alley while his mind considered the shape of the parchment's implications. From Varys, the spider's webs had a reach that sometimes made the sea seem like a modest puddle. Oberyn had never feared spiders. He had understood them. They were simply diligent craftsmen with unpleasant houses. He stepped into the alley with an appearance of thoughtlessness that he had practiced since boyhood. Someone moved in the dark. Not the small movement of a servant late to bed. The paused movement of a man who, having decided which way to use a knife, was waiting for a particular shadow that would ease his work. Oberyn leaned against the wall that smelled of yesterday's stews and allowed himself to whistle very softly, a tune his mother had hummed when the wind bullied the shutters. The man in the dark, perhaps thinking that any man who whistled in an alley at night did not deserve to keep speaking, stepped forward with a speed that would have been admirable if it had been used for fishing. Oberyn let him come. He did not reach for the spear yet. He simply shifted his weight at the moment when the knife would have entered below the ribs and knocked the attacker's wrist gently against the wall where the impression of it might outlast their lives. The knife did not clatter to the ground because the man was trained enough not to expect failure and so did not yet understand he had failed. That had always been the sweetest moment, when a man remained inside his self-story and the world softly refused to read from his script. "You are not from here," Oberyn said conversationally, his left hand moving with a grace that had persuaded many lovers to sigh and, in other circumstances, persuaded many men to drop what they had been confident they would hold. The knife slipped from fingers that had become quickly wet, then dry. "And you are very brave to take service in a house where the rooms are full of people with long memories." The man said nothing. He tried to pull away, and the movement told Oberyn more than words would. There was another man. 2, perhaps. He let his own silence become a net and cast it. The second man stepped from behind the mound of cabbage crates with a determination that made up for what it lacked in finesse. Oberyn sighed. He did not like killing men for being poorly trained. He liked killing men for being cruel on purpose. But poorly trained men can be cruel by accident of who pays them. He raised his voice just enough that it would leave the alley and enter the air of the kitchen. "Jorah Mormont," he said as if greeting a friend, which in a sense he was. "How many knives is a Khaleesi worth?" Jorah arrived with the exact timing of a man who has always had to run to get to the thing he wants to protect. He did not waste breath speaking. He simply took the shoulder of the second attacker and kissed it with the wall until the kiss was persuasive. Illyrio's eunuch came at speed that stood up to his mass and removed the first knife from the ground with 2 fingers that implied shame to blades. The alley was suddenly uninteresting to all concerned except the 2 men who now regretted the configuration of their lives. "Who sent you?" Oberyn asked, not curiously so much as methodically. The silence men produce when they are not paid to talk shares and ancestry with pride. And he did not misread it. He looked at Yora. "A demonstration," he suggested. Yora picked up one of the cabbage heads and pressed it to the wall beside the second man's ear, then produced from somewhere the little knife this house did not carry in their inventories. He cut the cabbage in a single upward stroke, and it tilted and fell with a sound distinct from things that scream but allied enough to them to instruct. The second man breathed differently. The first man, seeing this, decided speech was not a betrayal of anything worth being betrayed. "The hair," he said, and the way he said the word told the room what was meant by it. "The color. We were to take." Yora's jaw set, the habit of men who blame themselves for being born. Oberyn's smile had no warmth now. "There are places," he said, "where they cut the hair of girls before they are sold, so that nothing will catch. There are places where hair is a currency. You do not know those places. This is unfortunate. Now you learn that the consequence of your ignorance is your death." They died quickly. Oberyn did not watch. He knew what he looked like when he killed. He knew the face of a man whose arm had been taught a language and had learned it well. He had no desire to introduce that face to Daenerys yet. He turned to Yora. "You are useful," he said. "Do you prefer to be treated as if your usefulness excuses the reason you are useful? Or would you rather talk about the reason now over a bottle?" Yora blew a breath out that was almost laughter and almost contempt, and more than either a man keeping himself together. "I prefer," he said, "to be useful." "Then be so," Oberyn replied, and he clapped the man on the shoulder because sometimes men needed the touch of a kind of father they did not have. "There are people here who have counted her hair. There will be people there who count her steps. She will have a call, and the call will think himself the counting. He will be wrong. Make sure he is wrong in ways that do not make you die too soon." They returned to the hall and the glow of burned tallow. Oberyn stood by a pillar where he could see Daenerys and not be seen by her. She spoke to Drogo in a voice that was audible only to the person being spoken to, an art all queens must learn, whether their crowns are iron or hair. He watched her move, and he thought of Elia and did not allow grief to be the only thing he thought of. He thought, if someone had been this for Elia, if someone had stood near and said, "You are allowed to reach for the thing you will be punished for reaching for," would she have not died in the way she did? He thought, such thoughts arrive late. Such thoughts arrive and sit down and put their feet on your table. Later still, when the night had let go of the house and the house had relaxed back into itself, he lay on the couch Illyrio had provided, under a sheet that smelled faintly of mint. His spear leaned against the wall as a lover would, familiar with the room's darkness and unimpressed by the room's comforts. He listened to the small noises people make when they sleep, whistles of breath, the shifts of bodies forgetting they have bones, and let his mind move across maps and out of them. Viserys, Daenerys, Yora, Drogo, Illyrio, Varys, spinning silk across water as if he could stitch a continent from rumor. Doran, patient in his chair that was both throne and trap. Ella, Ia, whose hair smelled of sun even in the shade. In the morning there would be horses. In the morning there would be a wide plain, and the smell of leather and men and the weight of a sky that does not allow pretense. In the morning he would decide whether to ride with the Khalasar to the place where mountains are undone by habit or to remain here and put his ear to the ground for words with tiny feet. He would, perhaps, speak to Daenerys again and put his hand lightly on the air near her shoulder so that she felt what the hand would feel like if the hand were allowed to touch. He closed his eyes and saw the Iron Throne. He had never sat in it. The chair had never been his to even fancy, but he knew how to imagine weight. The throne looked back at him the way iron looks at an arm that believes itself strong. He pictured a spear leaning against that chair. He pictured the spear upright, patient, saying nothing, waiting for a person to understand what it meant that it was there. In sleep, he did not dream of blood. He dreamed of a woman with white hair holding a glass up to her eye and seeing that the smallest things, when examined, were larger than the lies grown men told themselves across tables. Dawn arrived in a pale mood, sliding down the side of the house like someone too proud to knock. Oberyn rose as the city yawned and scratched behind one ear. He took an orange from the bowl Illyrio had left because a man is not a thief if he has been told he may steal. He peeled it with a care that gave the peel a single ribbon, and breathed the clean wild scent. He bit, and the sourness made his mouth understand the advent of the day. He dressed without calling for servants and slung the spear across his back. You could carry a spear as a threat, or you could carry it as a declaration of identity. He attempted both. In the courtyard, grooms were doing the priestly work men do for animals they expect to speak the language of their bodies. Dothraki horses are not large and are all power. The grooms did not glance at him. This was the respect one pays someone who has not yet proven they matter. He liked it. It simplified his work. Daenerys was there also, with a scarf around her hair that tried to be the sky and failed in a pretty way. Yora spoke to her with the careful respect of a man trying not to allow to be seen that he is trying to be kind. Drogo did not stand near them. He was a planet with his own orbit, drawing in and allowing distance without apology. Oberyn inclined his head to the girl and then to the man. "You will mount today," he said to Daenerys. "Do not let the horse think you are asking permission." "What if I am?" she asked, and her smile was very quick. "Then you must learn to make the horse wish you would ask again," he said. "The trick is to be the place it wishes to return to. And if I fall? Then you will see the world from another angle," Oberyn said. "This is good. Too few people do that without being pushed." He turned and called to one of Illyrio's men for a mount. He did not insist upon a fine animal. He wanted something that would allow him to look as if he were not the thing he was. The horse he was given was a patient creature with a coat the exact color of dust after rain is a memory. He stroked its neck and let it know with his hand that there would be no surprises, and then gave its ear a little tug to say there might be, but nothing it could not handle. Viserys arrived in a tunic that had never seen sweat. He smelled like a garden at night. He made a small sound of distaste when his foot encountered a patch of dried mud, and then pretended he had not made the sound. Oberyn watched him and thought, not unkindly, that this boy had survived too long without understanding that dirt is the cost of moving forward. Illyrio made a speech that was mercifully short, and Drogo made no speech at all, which was a courtesy of another kind. The call set his foot to stirrup and became a thing on a horse with the inevitability of a hawk deciding to be heir. Daenerys placed her foot upon the stone block a servant had placed and paused as if listening for a word within herself. She mounted, and the motion was not entirely graceful and not entirely not. The horse accepted her. She took its mane lightly in her hand and adjusted to the fact that being above the ground altered the way a person felt about the truth. Oberyn put his foot to the horse and swung up. He placed the spear against his thigh where it would speak to him when the body of the day did. Yora looked like the man he had always been, riding. Viserys looked like what boys look like when they are about to pretend they are men. The column began to gather itself from scattered intentions into a single movement, and the gates of Illyrio's house yawned open as if bored. They rode into the city and out of it, through lanes where merchants lifted hands that contained both blessing and numbers. They passed men who had no words for what they were seeing and women who had too many. Children pointed because children do not yet know that pointing is rude. The sea held itself to the left, and then the land took over. The grasses of the plains rose up to meet them in a hymn that no one sang because the wind sang it for them. Daenerys's back straightened in increments that would have been invisible if a person had not been watching her and waiting for exactly this. Sometimes she looked down at her hand, where the ring of sand pressed coolly against her skin. Once she turned, quickly, and caught Oberyn's eye. He nodded once to say, "I am here, not for you to lean on, for you to know you could." Toward noon, when the river had nodded itself and the sky had decided on a color and meant it, Oberyn rode forward to keep time with the call. A blood rider moved to block him. Oberyn smiled with precise warmth and spoke in the words of a Dothraki greeting he had learned from a woman whose ribs he had counted with his fin. Jair's once, and who had later told him there are kinds of kindness strangers practice that are more intimate than what lovers do. The blood rider considered being impressed and chose disdain instead. It cost him nothing. Drogo glanced over, and in that glance a small exchange was made that made no noise and changed a piece of the map. "You wish to speak," Drogo said, "because men of his sort reserve the right to make statements that function as permission." "I wish to listen," Oberyn answered, "because men of his sort understand that listening is a weapon most people do not know what to do with." He watched Drogo watching him and assumed nothing about what the man saw. "You are thin," Drogo said, and it was not an insult but an inventory. "I am fast," Oberyn replied and did not smile. "Your woman," Drogo said. "She is in the tents behind you?" "I have many women," Oberyn said lightly. "They are the women of my homeland. The wind, the rumor, the wine. They are here." He touched his chest. "And they are there." He gestured at the horizon, which was honest enough that it did not need ornament. "If you mean a wife, I have her also, but her patience is not with me now." Drogo considered him and adopted a neutrality that could become respect if fed and become violence if starved. "You wish to ride with us?" he asked. "I wish," Oberyn said, and let the answers assemble themselves as they spoke. "To see the place where your mother taught you to be dangerous. I wish to see the men who will one day speak of this journey as the time they learned a name they did not know and needed. I wish to watch a girl become a queen. I wish to see if the story told about you is true." And, he added, "I wish to see the sky where it has no edges." Drogo grunted. Could have been approval or a man marking a dog's bark in a field. "Ride," he said. Oberyn fell back. He could feel Yora's look like the pressure of a hand on the back of a neck, friendly and full of caution. He could feel Viserys' look as a stone that wants gravity to do its work faster. He could feel Daenerys' look like a thread that had chosen a needle. In the afternoon, he told her a story about a woman in Dorne who had ruled and been hated and made herself useful despite it, and a storm in which the sand had climbed into the mouths of trees and made them cough for a season. He told it the way people tell stories when they intend them to be ladders. She listened the way people do who are already climbing. As the sun began to decide whether to be gentler and could not decide, a rider came from the city behind with a letter in his mouth, metaphorically speaking. He was one of Illyrio's men. He delivered it with the courtesy of someone who signs the paper with his body and then disappears into the dust. From Varys, Oberyn read, "Elio's cousin of a cousin to Illyrio's barber." The words were neat, and their neatness outshone the candle of panic they wanted to feed. A movement in King's Landing. Names moved like chairs. A mountain stirred. A queen smiled. A child laughed at the wrong moment. The web tightened. The letter did not say any of this. The letter said, "A change of weather." It meant, something old is happening again, in a new costume. Oberyn folded the paper once, twice. He felt the spear against his thigh. He looked at Daenerys and then at the horizon, which did not care what men called it. He could have turned back there and inserted himself into a city's plans. He did not. He had chosen the wide place and the slowness, the way a seed chooses, by doing nothing but being ready, to become a tree. That night, under a sky that did not need stars because it had invented them, they made camp where a little grove gave the wind something to argue with. Fires found their appetites and made circles of light men could step in and out of. The Khals' tent rose like an animal with a rich pelt. Daenerys' smaller tent was placed with care and ignorance in equal parts, and the space before it emptied in the manner of spaces men are not sure whether to enter with respect or fear. Oberyn sat with Yora, sharing a skin of wine that had pretended to be better in the bottle. They spoke of islands and the way men's hearts are smaller there and thus more honest, and of women who find their ways into the rooms men build to keep themselves from hearing certain truths. They did not speak of Westeros, which hung between them like a smell neither could decide was pleasant. "Why are you here?" Yora asked at last. as men do when they have chewed the bone of a thought until marrow leaks into their mouths and they are tired of the taste. "Revenge?" Oberyn said, so plainly that it sat on the ground, surprised and content. Also curiosity. Also, the unpleasant addictiveness of seeing whether a thing can be bent when everyone has agreed it cannot. "And if it cannot?" Yora asked. "Then I will have learned," Oberyn said. "And I will have not sat scratching myself while time did its work." Yora drank and sighed. "She is," he began and stopped. "She is," Oberyn agreed. They let the sentence be completed by the night. When he lay himself down at last, the spear beside him, he thought again of the Iron Throne and the gentle, brutal insistence of iron. He imagined, with a precision that surprised him, the sound a spear might make if it fell against that chair while in a room where men practiced admiration. He imagined the look on a queen's face, not a girl's, not a king's sister's, but the face of a woman whose hand had learned the weight of rule because no one had shied her away from it. He imagined telling Elia, "I carried it a little way for you, for us, for the children, for the things we said under our breath because the world would not be kind to us if it heard." He imagined Illyria's fingers at the back of his neck, and her voice murmuring, "Bring me a story." In the morning, the sun would rise as if it had invented brightness. They would ride. He would tea. Each Daenerys to drop her shoulder at the right moment to make a horse think she had told it a secret. He would listen to Viserys and decide which of his lies might be coaxed into becoming truth. He would consider sharpening the spear differently. He would drink and eat and refuse to be surprised. He would move the smallest units of the world. A look, a hesitation, a story, until their arrangement made different music. He slept, and when he dreamed, the sand under the glass was oceans, and the glass was the sky, and the ring on her hand was a promise he had no right to make and made anyway. The spear dreamed too, as spears do, of being held. The wind dreamed of carrying ash or petals. The sea, far behind, dreamed of remembering the shapes of columns of horses passing in a winter to come and a winter that had been, and of a throne that learned the names of those who dared bring their weapons close enough to leave a mark. By mid-morning the Khalasar had chewed the road into threads of dust that flickered and settled and rose again with the discipline of a drilled army. The horses talked to one another in the steady language of hooves and nostrils. Men spoke less, as if sound might be taxed by the horizon. There is a way a large moving thing remakes the day. It becomes the weather. Flies altered their route to it. Small birds rode its draft. Even the wind considered its pace and chose to be companion rather than adversary. The Dothraki did not look behind them because they remembered without looking. The city had become a thought they were done having. Oberyn kept his horse where he could see Daenerys without making a point of seeing Daenerys. She rode like a person who had once been instructed to be small and now was trying to occupy the size she had without being corrected. Her hands learned the mouth of the horse as if learning a phrase whose grammar promised more than the words. When she faltered, it was not with panic but with a kind of cold curiosity. Oh, this is the moment where fear is supposed to enter, and then it did not, and the moment passed. "Your knee," he said, when the ground offered an excuse to ride beside her, "is telling two stories. Let it tell one." She looked down at her leg as if it were a stranger whose handwriting she found familiar. "Which story should it tell?" "The one that ends with the horse believing you would never argue with it in public," he said. "Let us not embarrass our friends." She adjusted, a fraction. The horse's shoulder agreed. Yora gave the small, approving grunt of a man who knows that praise, like salt, can be spoiled by overuse. Viserys looked only at the line of the Khals back and saw in it a road leading straight to a door that would open because he wished it. He did not notice how the door kept moving while he walked. The grass changed color the way a man with 3 shirts changes to a 4th because he enjoys the feeling of being clean. The blades were dull green in shade and very bright where the sun discovered them. The earth underneath had the particular generosity of soil that has not been asked to pretend to be anything else. It accepted hooves without complaint. Oberyn breathed through his mouth and tasted nothing but dust and the faint iron of his own blood where a tooth had been too thoughtful with his cheek. He had not slept poorly, but the sort of sleep a moving camp permits is like listening in a room where other people talk softly and tell the same story you tell yourself, only in another language. They halted when Drogo halted. It was not a command. It was physics. The men loosened girths and loosened themselves. A girl laughed very quickly and then remembered to be older. Daenerys drank from the water skin Yora handed her as if negotiating with thirst, accepting enough to make the body a place where the mind could remain, refusing enough to remind the body who owned it. Oberyn rolled his shoulder and felt the spear acknowledging the gesture like a cat bumping a knee to say, "You are mine and I am yours." "You watch," Daenerys said to him, not as complaint. "All day. If I stop, I will see only what I expect," he said. "Expectation is a way to go blind in company." "What do you expect?" she asked. "A man to fall when pride catches his foot," Oberyn said. "A woman to believe she cannot say a thing she has not been allowed to think. A horse to behave like a horse, which is to say honestly. A storm eventually. The shape of a letter I have not read yet. The rumor of my brother's sigh traveling all this way to chide me." She drank again and grinned a little. "Doran," she said, tasting the name like a new fruit. "Yes," Oberyn replied. "He sighs the way some people sing." "And you?" she asked. "What do you do the way some people sing?" He tilted his head as if listening to the answer arrive. "Sometimes I fight," he said. "Sometimes I love. Sometimes I sit very still and make a room nervous." They rode again. The light moved. A hawk cut the afternoon into slices and found a mouse in one. When the land flattened as if planning to be a sheet for a bed, Drogo put his heels to his mount and turned the pace to something that asked the lungs for more. The Khalasar lengthened. The sound found a pitch at which the air ceased to bother holding it and let it pass. Oberyn felt the old happiness in his chest, the one that came when the body was asked to speak a language it remembered from childhood. He let the horse go and matched Daenerys' rhythm when she dared to match the men's. "This," she said afterward, breathless but clear, "is like opening a window inside the head. Keep it open," Oberyn said. "People will try to close it for you and call the closing safety. You will make your own weather if you practice." At dusk they made a place to be dark in. Tents grew from bundles as if the day had shed them and they had waited to be recognized. The smell of cooked meat climbed above the smell of men. There were fires with different characters. One rowdy, one quiet, one efficient, one sentimental. Each a little kingdom with its own rules. Oberyn took his food and ate standing, because moving and standing are both ways to declare a position. Yora ate near him, but not near enough to combine. Daenerys ate with Irri and Jiki and the third girl whose name Oberyn had not caught and would not forget to catch. Viserys ate not enough and then too much, the way men do when they think hunger is an insult and satiety a medal. Oberyn told the story of Nymeria when the fire had learned his face. He told it differently than a maester would, because maesters tell stories as if they are locking them safely away, and Oberyn preferred to leave doors ajar. "There was a woman," he said. "She did not like the way the world behaved where she was born. She did not like the way it told her what shape to be and what use to make of herself. So she burned her ships." "Why?" Daenerys asked softly, as if the answer might be a thing she would have to hold and did not know yet how heavy it was. "Because when you burn a ship," Oberyn said, "you do not have two choices anymore. You have one. Sometimes this is the only way to teach courage without calling it by its name." "Or folly," Yora muttered. Oberyn smiled to show he had heard. "Sometimes those are the same, seen from different sides of a river," he said. "Nymeria crossed her river. She stepped onto our sand and said, 'Here,' and our sand said, 'Yes.'" Daenerys watched the fire as if history might compute itself there in different arithmetic. "In my mother's stories," she said, "the women were always brave, but the story did not stay with them after they were. We have a habit," Oberyn said, "of treating women like swords. We admire them when they are useful and put them away when they cut us. In Dorne we have other habits too." He took a drink and handed the skin to Yora because Yora looked like his thoughts had teeth. "We are not better," he added to Daenerys. "We are simply ourselves. which sometimes looks like better from far away. There was a commotion near the line of picketed horses, swift and then slower, as if men were remembering it was night and fury can wait until morning to wear its brighter colors. Oberyn set down his cup. He did not run. He walked as a man does who has decided the thing he is going to do and knows that the distance to it will not make him change his mind. Yora came because Yora always did. A boy was on the ground, the sticky sound that surrounds the breath after a good fright present in the dark like a small creature. Two men stood pretending they were not pleased to have found someone weaker to be in charge of. "What is it?" Oberyn asked to practice courtesy. "Thief," one of the men said. His braid was less than a man's braid, which made his cruelty sharper. "He cut tether. He takes horse." The boy's hands were palm up, the way hands are when they are trying to remember what else they can be. He was no more than 9. He wore the impudent clothes hunger puts on boys. A belt too long, one sleeve too short for an arm that had grown while the sleeve slept. He had a knife in the way boys hold knives who have imagined them more often than used them. "Whose horse?" Oberyn asked. The man gestured, satisfied to have been asked a question to which he could provide an answer. The horse was not a Dothraki horse. It belonged to one of the merchants who had slid alongside the Khalasar like a barge to a ship, selling salt and small tools and folded knives that remembered other men's pockets. The merchant himself stood a little behind the crowd with the look of someone who would like to be very brave at a convenient time in the future and would settle for justice as long as it was inexpensive. Oberyn knelt. He has found that people betray themselves most honestly when they are forced to look down at someone. "Boy," he said, "did you try to take the horse?" The boy considered lying and then remembered there were too many ways to be wrong in a lie. "Yes," he said. "Why?" "Because the world is large," the boy said, and then miserable. "And I am small. Do you have a mother?" Oberyn asked. It was not an accusation. "Once," the boy said, and then again, as if this were a title, "Once." Oberyn put his fingers against the ground and felt its coolness. "If you are going to steal," he said, as if he were speaking to a nephew at a market and not to a boy pressed between a knife and a crowd, "do not steal a horse that belongs to a man who travels with a river of horsemen. Steal a chicken or an orange. I do not like thieves, but I hate stupidity worse." The Dothraki considered this speech and decided it carried a scent of their humor. The crowd's tone shifted. The two men who had found the boy relaxed because the possibility of killing had been replaced with the possibility of laughing, and laughter is a cheaper exhilaration. Oberyn stood and pointed at the merchant. "You," he said, "how much is the horse worth?" The man blinked to buy time. 8 silvers, he said, aiming high like all men who have put a price on something in front of an audience. Oberyn looked at the horse, its hip bone making mild suggestions to the skin, the hair at the fetlocks holding burrs as if they were jewels. 4, he said. "And if you say 5, I will give you 3. You will also have the story that you did not argue with a prince. You can sell that story 10 times before it is empty." The man thought very fast and discovered prudence disguised as delight. 4, he said. Oberyn took 4 silvers from his belt and handed them over. He did not perform reluctance. He did not look at the boy when he gave them. He turned to the 2 men who had found the thief. "You," he said, "will take this horse to the back line and tie it with a knot a child could undo. Then you will sit beside it until dawn as if the horse has told you it is afraid of the dark. If you all asleep and the horse wanders, you will wake as men do who deserve to be woken badly." They laughed and obeyed because the order reminded them of their own youth and did not ask them to be less than they were. Oberyn finally looked at the boy. "You wanted to be large," he said. "Ride with us in the morning. Not for long, not to stay, just to feel the world under you change its mind. Then you may decide what to do with your size." The boy nodded very hard, which in children is the same as a promise. He vanished before someone could put a hand on him out of habit. When Oberyn returned to the fire, Daenerys turned her face to him with the relief of someone whose guess had been correct, that he would go, that he would come back with fewer marks on the dark than other men might. "What did you do?" she asked. "I bought a story for 4 silvers, he said. "Was it a good price?" By morning, Oberyn said, we will know if it was a story that wanted to be bought. He slept in the way of men who have grown tired of practicing death in the night. Close to dawn he woke because the world made a new sound. Not danger, precisely, but attention. It was the soft sigh of a tent cloth moving when there is no wind. He was standing with his spear in hand before his eyes had done anything but open. Outside, a shadow tried not to be a shape, failed, and became a man. Oberyn did not call out. Varys' sparrow, he thought, before the figure whispered in a voice that wanted to be a different voice and had not yet learned how. From the Magister, the shadow said. From Illyrio. A hand held out a tight parcel the size of a man's fist. Illyrio has excellent timing, Oberyn said, taking it. He did not unwrap it until the shadow was gone, because accepting gifts is like drinking wine. One should not be seen doing it by a person who wishes to study the face it makes. He unwrapped the oilcloth and found within it a smaller cloth that had belonged to a woman's dress once upon a ballroom. Inside that, a letter, and under the letter, a small bottle whose glass had learned to be cautious. The letter was all bends and curves, Illyrio's hand making a meal of its own appetite. It said that the spider had webbed up something fat, talking King's Landing of a tournament and a return and a hand who might not be a hand much longer. The bottle contained oil that had met with poison before. A test. Not for killing, for knowing. Illyrio's merchants shipped many things, including the knowledge of poisons. He was offering a shield made out of the understanding that men are not above tasting what they are given. Oberyn looked at the letter a long time. Words about tournaments were bells to him. Their ringing did not change what he had chosen to be. The bottle he held like a coin. Then he wrapped both again and put them away where he would forget neither. When the camp woke properly, it did so with a clatter of domesticity that made war seem briefly like a rumor. Pots singing, horses explaining themselves, women laughing into one another's hair because laughter feels better when it has a place to land. Daenerys came from her tent looking as if sleep had not bothered to talk to her, and she was trying to decide whether to mind. She wore a plain dress that made her hair a brighter fact, wrapped in a scarf because someone had told her the sun can be tamed with cloth, and she was willing to see if it was true. Come, Oberyn said to her, when the ground had finished reminding the feet what they were for. We will make the horse believe you knew this before you were born. They worked for 2 hours in a patch of shade that moved like a thought when a conversation gets interesting. He did not touch her without need. He did not raise his voice. He showed her how a hand can lie and how a hand can tell the truth, and how to make the lie be a promise instead of a threat. He showed her how to stand on the ground as if the ground and she were complicit. He did not talk about how a queen's shoulders are carried because it is not shoulders that make a queen. He talked about weight and where to put it and when to let the body be led by the thing it wants most. Again, he said, when she was ready to be tired and therefore ready to learn. She did it again. Even Viserys, circling like a dog hoping to be called, had to witness it for what it was. Competence practiced into being. His face tightened. He did not speak to her. He spoke to Yora instead, about how long until King's Landing would feel the ground shake, about how the Khal would forget himself when presented with the splendor of a throne room and surrender his savage awe to a proper king. Yora answered with the humanity of a man who had allowed himself to be sold once already and did not intend to be sold again, even to hope. In the afternoon, Drogo's men held a sport in the place where the camp had been a camp and was now an arena by virtue of attention. 2 riders raced to a mark that was not a mark until someone had decided it to be. They threw spears at a hide that had once belonged to an ox and now belonged to the air between them. The spears made a song. Oberyn watched until he could participate and not seem to be trying to be seen. Prince, one of the blood riders said, the one who had disliked the word for greeting spoken in his tongue from a foreign mouth. You will embarrass yourself. Only if I intend to impress, Oberyn said lightly. I intend to enjoy myself. He removed the oiled leather from his spear with the same care with which he had done it for Daenerys. The Dothraki watched the reveal the way men watch any intimate undressing, with an authority that knows it is only authority as long as it keeps secrets. He stepped into the ring that was not a ring and placed his feet where a man's past told his balance to be. He did not ride. He stayed on the ground where the spear had learned his height. The Blood Rider laughed in a way that invited others to join and not look at him to see when Oberyn did not oblige or object. He waited for the throw. The Blood Rider's spear was a river in the air for a breath, then a branch in another breath, then an intention. Oberyn felt it arrive as one feels a thought arriving in a lover's face. He did not knock it aside as men do when the point is to demonstrate strength. He met it, instead, with his own spear's haft, 2/3 down from the head, and turned it with a caress. The Dothraki spear remembered it had another place to be and went. The crowd sound was not applause. It was the deeper thing that lives in the chests of men who have seen something they wish to remember with their bodies. Oberyn smiled because it is always wise to smile when people decide to like you for doing something you enjoy. Again, he said. They did it again. The Blood Rider adjusted because pride is an animal that learns quickly when it senses danger. Oberyn adjusted in the tiny way that separates grace from arrogance. He made one mistake deliberately and corrected it within the window where correction feels like an inevitability instead of an apology. He allowed the man to be pleased with himself. He allowed the men watching to be pleased by both of them. Afterward, when water had become again the central fact of the afternoon, Drogo spoke to him without turning his head. "The spear is a woman's weapon," he said. "Not in insult, but in the way a man names a thing to understand it." "It is a lover's weapon," Oberyn replied. "It prefers to be at the right distance." Drogo grunted, and the grunt contained consideration. He nodded toward Daenerys. She sat now beneath a piece of cloth that created its own shade, face turned toward the breeze as if she had hired it to consult her skin. "She learns," he said. "She was ready," Oberyn answered. "People mistake readiness for a gift. It is work that has prepared itself." Drogo looked at him then, fully, as one looks at a man whose words may be useful when they are repeated later. "You talk much," he said. "I can be quiet for months," Oberyn said. "No one has asked me to be lately." Drogo's mouth twisted briefly into what, on another man, would have been a smile. Then he was elsewhere again, in the place rulers go within their skulls when they have been reminded that governing is mostly listening to what is not said with words. That night, Illyrio's letter was a weight in Oberyn's belt. He went to the edge of the camp where the grass moved as if performing for an audience, and thought of King's Landing. He imagined the way the Red Keep would taste to a man who had not seen it since youth. Imagined sucking the iron off a tooth as a means of recalling blood's texture. A tournament meant distraction and debts. A tournament meant men who wanted to be looked at and men who preferred to look without being seen. A tournament meant, often, a head turned when it should have remained level. He could not reach his spear that far, but he could reach the mindfulness that had earned him the spear's company. He decided to write to Dorne, as a man writes to a brother who has forgiven injuries not yet committed. He found ink and a stiff brush that one of Illyrio's men had with the resigned air of a tool that belongs to a merchant and is asked to serve a soldier. The paint of the night made his letters darker. He did not waste the first page with apology. He wrote, "I am well. The girl is the sort who listens to the part of herself no one has yet taught her to distrust. The boy is everything we feared and hoped, which is to say, he will be useful to his enemies and ours. The call is stone where other men are mere sand, but even stone erodes when a river is constant." He wrote, "I have touched the future and it did not shy." He wrote, "Forgive me." When dawn showed its lower lip, the boy who had tried to steal stood at the edge of the camp as instructed. He had not slept. His hair was the kind that refuses to be the shape other hair desires, which is to say, it was honest. Oberyn brought him to the horse he had bought through his scolding last night and explained it would be his until sunset and not one moment after. The boy nodded in the manner of children who have discovered how to keep time when they are being given something temporary. "What is your name?" Daenerys asked him because people ask children that only when they intend not to forget the answer. "Carek," he said, with the certainty of a boy saying the one thing he is known by that cannot be taken. "Carek," she said again, so the syllables would know her mouth and be willing to return. "Ride." He rode as only boys who have stolen rides and been returned to the ground by force can ride, with fear and joy simultaneously strapped to the back. He fell once as if earth had been waiting to hug him. He stood up and looked at the horse as if it had given him a recommendation letter. He did not cry. He did not laugh. He remembered which is the better of the two. When noon sulked hotly into the tent of the day, the Khalasar came upon a river whose edges were polite enough to hold their shape. They watered horses and souls. The women washed cloth and grief in the same water and trusted that both could be made lighter by effort. Men splashed in ways that they would not keep to for long, because they had reputations to polish and water leaves marks when it dries. Daenerys undid her scarf and let the air consider her hair. It obliged and tried to be reasonable and failed and moved it anyway. Viserys chose this moment to decide he had been unnoticed for too long. He stepped to the river with a bowl of words he meant to pour on everyone and slipped on a thought. His boot met a rock and made a declaration it could not support. He went to one knee, then to two, and then to his dignity. The Dothraki pretended not to see. This was not kindness. This was the etiquette of watching a man fight with his own shadow. Jorah reached to steady him and Viserys flinched away as if help were an insult. "Do not touch me," he said. "You are not my man." "I am your sister's," Jorah said, quiet enough to keep the river untroubled. "That is safer." Viserys had a hand then for his sword, which did not belong where he was trying to put it. Oberyn was very near before anyone knew he had moved. He did not put his hand on Viserys. He put it on the air near him, as he had imagined doing with Daenerys, and because he was a man whose hands have learned to tell stories without touching, the air cooperated. "Your Grace," he said, with a silk only slightly stained by truth. "The river is watching. It will misunderstand." Viserys gulped 2 breaths and attempted to make the third one noble. "They laugh at me," he said. "They laugh because laughter is easier to carry than respect," Oberyn said. "Let them carry what they can. Your task is to give them a greater weight later." "I will," Viserys said, the way a child speaks to a bedtime promise. "Good," Oberyn said. Then softer, "Do not pull a sword where men make their water. Choose your altars with care, if you want the gods' attention." Viserys looked as if he had been given a puzzle he could solve if allowed to take it apart first. But he let his hand fall from the hilt and made a gift of this to himself. That night the air was a little different. Clouds crawled over the stars the way cats crawl over a lap they have claimed but cannot make comfortable. Oberyn lay with the spear near his arm and thought of poison. Not in wine, not in food. A thought in a mind, seeded in such a way that it blooms in the wrong season and kills a crop. He did not worry over Daenerys. Worry is what men do when they think the feeling will excuse their failure to prepare. He considered who would pour what into whose ear. At the next pause in the ride, a merchant with eyes too polite approached Daenerys with a box whose hinges tried to pretend they were gold. "For the Khaleesi," he said, in the way of men who have practiced how to say a word they think will make people forget all the other words they have said poorly. "Stones. Pretty stones. Lucky." Daenerys looked at Oberyn because she had learned that looking cannot be taken back once it is given. She wanted to spend it where it would multiply. Oberyn nodded as if the gift were a thing he had asked for. He took the box and opened it where sunlight could enter. Inside lay small polished ovals. They were colored like the backs of beetles. Green into black, blue into a purple that meant to be more purple, red that made promises about fire it did not intend to keep. "From ass high," the merchant offered, and said it as if saying the word were a credential. "Ass high," Oberyn repeated. As men repeat the name of an acquaintance they do not wish to be seated next to at supper. He took out the bottle Illyrio had sent, and let one of the ovals touch the oil, then touch a sliver of meat he had cut from his own portion. He waited, watching not the meat but the merchant's mouth. It did not change expression. The meat did not change color. Oberyn ate it because refusing would be more spectacle than caution. He held up one of the stones. It was lighter than it looked. He placed it in Daenerys' palm with a small pressure. "Lucky," he said, "because you will decide it is." They passed the box back to the merchant. "Keep them," Daenerys said. "Sell them to someone who needs luck more than I do." The merchant bowed with the bitterness that attends men who learn that their profession has been practiced on them. He vanished in the dust of his humiliation and would tell a story about the Khaal's wife that would be embroidered or stripped depending on the ears. The next day, the sky reminded everyone that there is always something larger than them. The storm approached not with drama but with quiet. The way good musicians step to the front of a hall and begin to play, and the song instructs everyone to stop. The air became thick, as if it had been kneaded. Horses grew restless with the information rain gives their skin before it gives their riders eyes. Drogo lifted his hand and the khalasar slowed and spread as one spreads oil in a pan so that it does not burn. Under the first enormous drop, a boy screamed and then laughed because he was young enough to enjoy being wrong in public. The rain came with the concentration of a man who has decided to finish a task. The world smelled repaired. Oberyn turned his face up and let the water find him. He thought of Dorne's rain, which arrives like an apology offered too late, and then of King's Landing's rain, which smells like agreed-upon lies. He thought, "This is the first thing that has touched all of us today without asking permission." Daenerys stood in it the way a woman stands in a crowd that will not step aside and then does. Her hair became a different thing. The circle of glass on her finger trapped a bead of rain and made it larger, and she admired it as one admires a trick one could learn. Viserys, of course, sulked under a cloak. Jorah smiled at no one. Drogo sat his horse as if he had told the rain where to be. They waited it out and then were new, each of them. Men do not admit this often. That rain makes them better for a time. They tightened girths and tightened themselves and rode again, the world shedding its wetness in necklaces of light as they moved. The first of the free cities evaporated behind them not because its walls were thin but because distance is a kind of solvent. They moved toward the place that accepts all arrivals with equal surety, the city in the shadow of the Mother of Mountains. Oberyn did not plan for that arrival. He planned for what would be done with the silence between now and then. He taught Daenerys to throw a spear without endangering anyone but the hay she meant to endanger. He taught her to listen to the men near her and to the men far from her, and not to confuse distance with unimportance. He told Viserys stories about kings who had learned to be men before they learned to be kings, and about men who had tried to be kings before learning to be men, and allowed the boy to choose which he thought himself to be. He let Jorah talk about Bear Island without interruption, because every exile is a map with a pin returning to a single place. Men are gentler when they have been permitted to point. At a stop where the grass had the shy look of a thing often eaten and determined to return anyway, Oberyn found himself seated with two of the Blood Riders, polishing the spear and talking of women as if women were weather and needed no defense. One of the men pointed at the engraving near the spear's head and asked for its story. Oberyn told him it was not a story and not a prayer. It was a question. The Blood Rider was satisfied with an answer he could not use and respected it. "Why are you far from your son?" the man asked, which was a graceful piece of malice disguised as curiosity. "Because my shadow has grown bored," Oberyn said. "I wanted to move it around." "You want the iron chair," the other suggested, not as accusation but as a farmer might say, "You want water." "Not hunger but accuracy." "I want to speak to it," Oberyn said. "It is an old thing. I would know if it lies." They laughed and stopped when laughter tired of itself. The night did what night does when men keep it company with fire. On a morning when the light felt like it had been set out for them personally, they encountered a clutch of men riding the wrong way. Their cloaks were not the kind Dothraki wear. Their faces were the sort that learn quickly to be other faces. One of them smiled too much and had scars he enjoyed. They were sellswords of a type that grows in clusters where money has smelled like a story men might wish to believe. The smiling man wanted to sell the group at least a rumor. "We are come from the west," he announced with the volume of a man who designs his audience while speaking. "From the shore. The sea is busy." He listed the ships he said he had seen. Painted ones, fast ones, ones that looked like dragonflies and carried stings. He offered his own blade without shame because shame is expensive. Drogo did not care. He did not even pretend he might care later. He let the men speak to the air in front of him, and then waved them away with the small courtesy one reserves for flies one is not prepared to slap. But Oberyn let his horse drift within speaking distance of the smiling man as he passed. "You handle steel the way a child handles a new word," he said. "You think volume will persuade people you have learned it." The man smiled harder. "I think a prince handles insult the way a cat handles perfume," he returned. "He rubs against it in public and scrubs it off in private." Oberyn enjoyed him for exactly half a breath longer than he should have. "Is there a wine merchant with you?" he asked, in a tone that implied a joke was ready to be made of someone else. The man frowned. "Wine, wine," Oberyn said. "The sort that needs to travel. The sort that finds queens thirsty." "We have water," the man said. He peered without knowing why he peered. "You have heard a story," he accused. "I am a man who is told stories constantly," Oberyn said. "It is what happens when people decide your face will allow it." He moved on. Stories are for planting, not harvesting, and the Sellsword would repeat this odd conversation later in an inn, and someone would write a letter, and somewhere a spider would incline his head and think, "Ah." The day they first glimpsed the shape the Dothraki call sacred, the world widened abruptly, as if the plain had chosen to bow. The mother of mountains is not merely tall. It is correct. Even Oberyn, who does not care to salute rocks, felt his words fall quiet and go inline like boys called to order. The city in its shadow appeared not like other cities appear, slowly, by rumor and smell and architecture. It arrived as a decision. Tents spread like ideas. Wooden totems rose that were both ridiculous and beautiful. Carved horses whose eyes held admiration for men who had admired them into being. Daenerys looked longer than was polite. No one told her not to. She felt the pull the way women feel babies pull before the belly announces the fact. She put her hand to her scarf where the glass ring lay beneath and thought of weight again, and of whether a crown must always be heavier than a head. They passed between stakes hung with bones. Viserys tried to sneer and failed because some things wish to be seen and cannot be sneered at without cost. Drogo's back remained the same. Yora's face softened, briefly, as a man's face softens when he sees a church from far away and remembers a time when he believed he was seen by gods. Oberyn watched the people who watched them and counted how many pairs of eyes belonged to men who would later repeat what they had observed correctly. In the city, order was a different thing. Men did not bow to the same syllables. Power had been taught here in a separate school. Daenerys walked with her chin level and her gaze engaged. Oberyn did the same the way a dancer follows a rhythm that varies only by breath. Illyrio had told him once that power is sometimes made of velvet and sometimes of wood. Here it was made of sunlight and old agreements. He saw the woman who would become Maggie and did not go near her. He saw the man who would sell anything and went very near him, to know the scent he would leave later. At night, after the call's quiet rituals that were not quiet at all but were done quietly, after gifts and smoke and the kind of silence that is not quiet, Oberyn sat alone with the spear across his knees. A small girl, not Daenerys, not a servant, simply a child, stood at the perimeter of his intent. She was patient in the way only children are when they are waiting for something important that they cannot name. "What is it?" he asked, putting humor in the curve of his voice. "Your stick is a snake," she said, solemn, and then added as explanation, "It is asleep. Then we should not wake it," Oberyn said gravely. "We might be bitten by the dreams it is having." He lowered the spear so she could see the engravings near where hand meets weapon. "Do you see the question?" She looked and frowned and then nodded as if accepting a rule of grammar that has no example. "Yes. What does it ask?" "Who are you when you are not holding me?" she said at once. Oberyn unexpectedly felt the grain of mercy that lives under the bark of ruthlessness shift and show itself. "You are quick," he said. "My mother says the gods dropped me," she replied with the splendid cruelty of children's honesty. "And I hit my head and now I am quick. There are worse ways," he said, and was suddenly very tired. The following days in V's Dothrak were a kind of instruction that did not pretend to be one. Daenerys learned that to be looked at is not the same as to be seen. and to be seen is not the same as being known, and to be known is a raging danger unless a person has decided who will be allowed to know them. She learned which women could be asked for water and which for advice and which for the sort of friendship that contains within it a betrayal shaped like a gift. She learned that the language of braids is written in nouns and verbs both, what a man has done and what he might yet do. She learned that her brother was not going to learn anything unless he first learned the shape of shame. And Oberyn watched. He was nearby when her handmaids told her what women tell one another when men are absent and the world feels possibly reparable. He was nearby when a boy with a scar through his lip offered her a piece of honeycomb, and she accepted and then gave the larger half to the boy, and the boy learned something about generosity that would make him later choose not to cut a stranger's throat. He was nearby when Yora taught her a word in his language, and she tried it and it tasted like salt on her tongue, and she spoke it again to taste it again. He was not nearby when Viserys went among the stalls and tried to purchase respect. He did not need to be. He knew how that story would go. A man with too much name and not enough patience trying to bend would by staring at it. The stall owners would humor him because humor is profitable if respected. They would mock him when he had gone because mocking is profitable if it keeps the heart from believing itself poor. He did not need to see Viserys come back with a trinket he had been told was old. He only needed to see Daenerys look at her brother as if he were an old story she had already heard. One afternoon, a woman whose hair had learned to be gray in the exact places a life becomes heavy came to Oberyn with a jar. She said nothing. She gave him the jar with 2 hands and went away. Inside was an unguent that smelled like what doctors used to trick pain into stepping out into the yard. He took it as the tax he paid on being a man who had pitched his tent next to a queen's beginning. Gifts drift to the edges of such tents. If one is not careful, they make a ring around it and then a wall. At the horse market, because there is always a horse market even in a city of horsemen, a man with hands that had not yet chosen their sins tried to sell Oberyn something he did not need. This one can stop and turn in the length of a man's shadow, the seller promised. The horse, a dun with a stripe like an old scar down its back, looked at Oberyn as if to say, "Do not be trapped in this conversation." "What I need," Oberyn said, "is a thing with its own mind that agrees with mine sometimes and argues with it others." "You need a wife," the man said, cheerful. "I have one," Oberyn said, "and a spear." He touched the spear because touching it pleased him. The man laughed and took his laughter to someone else's tent. On a cold morning in a city that is not supposed to have cold mornings, a priest with eyes the color of theology lifted his hands and spoke of the mountain. His words were bread to the people who understood them and stones to those who did not. Either way, they filled the mouth. Oberyn stood where he could see the way people's faces altered when asked to imagine something bigger than their lives. Daenerys' face altered less than most. She had seen something bigger, and it had looked like an emptiness that could be filled with will. After, as the day attached itself again to ordinary errands, a man with the attentive gait of a messenger found Oberyn and, with good manners, presented him with another small roll of words. This one was from no one and everyone. It said, "The hand has fallen out of favor. The king is hunting his own appetite. A queen braids secrets into her children's hair. The wolf in the north has barked. A mountain rides." It said nothing that was actually news and everything that mattered. Oberyn folded it and fed it to the nearest fire, because some things must tithe to flame. In the quiet that came after flames had eaten, he closed his eyes and spoke to Elia. He did this without calling it prayer. He told her the girl had a spine made not of one piece but of many, which is better because then it can bend and not break. He told her the boy had a tongue too quick for his sense and that he would likely donate his head to the history books sooner than he should. He told her he had seen the place the spear might lean, just for a moment, so that iron could look at it and remember that weapons existed before chairs did. He did not tell her he missed her. She knew that already or did not, which is the same thing to the dead. It was there, in that week of learning how the city walked and how it slept and how its gossip traveled, that the Khal decided to leave. His reasons were the sorts of reasons men like him always have: grass growing better elsewhere. The need to be seen by the sky in other places. Boredom wearing the crown that ambition misplaced. The camp that was a city and the city that was a camp began to unmake themselves into motion. The women packed away laughter and the men packed away the look their faces wear when they are not being asked to be significant. The horses did the least. They were already travel, condensed into flesh. Before they went, a small thing happened that would not be small if you told it to the right ears. A girl, older than the Carrick boy, younger than the women who had taught Daenerys how to make hair say what hair must say, came running with the sort of run that wins races when it is needed. She approached both Oberyn and Daenerys because she had been in a place where she had learned both faces, and thrust out a cloth. Inside it lay an egg the size of a man's palm. It was not like the others in the heavy chest Illyrio had gifted. It was common, the sort of egg a poor woman saves because the shape pleases her and sells for bread when saving becomes less pleasant. "For luck," the girl said to Daenerys. "For the road." Then she lowered her voice as girls do when they have stored a different reason. "Because one day you will give me back something." Daenerys took the egg. It was warm from the girl's running or from the girl's hand or from the day. She looked at Oberyn. He did not nod. He did not advise. He only let his face be a place where courage could sit for a moment without having to perform itself. She put the egg in her satchel like a coin she would not spend until a very particular market. They left the city then, with the same certainty with which they had entered. On the far side of the Mother of Mountains, the plain greeted them like an old friend who has once scolded you for not writing and then taken you in the same breath. The light changed. The shadows moved like people who have remembered an appointment. Viserys rode badly because he was thinking about the throne again and not about his body's contract with the horse. He spoke to Daenerys as if reminding her that she had a brother, which is to say, as if reminding himself of it. She listened carefully and stored his words where they would not be reached for the next time she needed hope. Oberyn rode a little behind and to the left, where a man stays who would like to see the arrow shot at him and at the person in front of him both. He saw the men who watched him and pretended not to. He saw the woman who would decide to try to be his friend and later to betray him gently, for reasons she would be able to live with. He saw Yora doing the math of his loyalty and coming up with an answer that could be defended among men. He saw Drogo look at him as one looks at a tool that might or might not fit in the hand and might or might not be needed. He saw Daenerys do a thing that made him blink, only once but honestly. Without ceremony she called a girl to her who had been running beside the train of pack animals and put the girl up behind her on the saddle. The girl was too surprised to be afraid and clutched and then found her balance and then found herself grinning into the back of a queen's shoulder. Daenerys said nothing. She rode until the girl had learned a little of trust and then stopped and let her slide down, and the girl ran again, lighter, and would tell women that night a story about the Khaleesi that contained the recipe for a different kind of rule. In a country of grass, days can begin to feel like one long day. The body is tricked into believing it has not slept or has slept constantly. Oberyn allowed this to be true and false back and forth until it did not matter. He cared only to be in the place where decisions live when they have not yet been named. He refused 2 fights and took one. Refusal is also a weapon. And in the one he took he broke a man's wrist with the precision of a physician unwilling to allow the bone to knit badly later. He sent a small letter back with a courier who would forget half of his instructions and remember the important half by accident. He taught a boy not to stab with a spear as if the spear were a sword, and the boy loved him for it because all men love someone who shows them how to avoid a kind of embarrassment. They came at last to a village that had been a village and now was a suggestion. The Dothraki acknowledged it by ignoring it. This is a cruelty practiced by people who understand what a city feels like when it dies. Daenerys did not ignore it. She said very little to Oberyn. She said less to Yora. She dismounted and walked among the houses that were not houses as if she were shopping for grief. The wind had kept one door closed and one door open. Inside a room whose floor had learned to pretend to be dirt again, a bowl sat on a table. The bowl contained a smooth stone. The stone was not worth anything except that someone had placed it in a bowl and reminded it that objects can be loved and then abandoned. Daenerys touched the stone and did not take it. Outside, men did what men do around emptiness. They filled it with talk of what they would do if they had been present when the emptiness was made. Oberyn did not interrupt. He found a cup of water and a place to sit where he could see both the road and Daenerys and the spear all at once. He thought of the Iron Throne as if it were a song whose melody he was learning slowly and deliberately so that he would not embarrass himself when he hummed it later. He thought of Dorne holding the letter he had sent and thinking, "My brother has made a friend of a storm." He thought of Valeria, who would be in a courtyard in Sunspear at this hour making a child choose between two peaches and pretending, for the pleasure of it, that the second was a fair choice. That night they ate meat the way people eat something guilt has visited and left again, with relish and with the courtesy of sauce. The fires were rowdy. Men got drunk in the way men do when they have rode long and very far without being told to stop. Their bodies wanted a different fatigue. Oberyn drank enough to feel the edge of the feeling that says, "Speak plainly," and not so much that he would obey it. He went to his tent early and sat with the spear and the silence. There was a noise outside, not the noise of assassination, not the noise of friendship, the noise of a man deciding to become something else. He stepped out and found Viserys standing as if he had discovered a piece of the sky on the ground and did not know how to pick it up. "Prince Oberyn," Viserys said, using the title as if it made taste in his mouth. "Walk with me." Oberyn looked at the moon, which had decided to be cut in half and not bleed. "All right," he said. They walked to the edge of the camp. The grass leaned away from them with interest. Viserys had surprise in him, which is to say, he might yet be saved by an enemy who wanted to be careful. This is a rare quality in a man his age. He said nothing for a dozen steps. He was thinking, which by itself was a development. "I have been humiliating myself," he said at last. "Yes," Oberyn said. Viserys flinched. "You are supposed to protest." "No," Oberyn said. "You are correct. When a man speaks truth for the first time in a day, do not contradict him. It is unkind." Viserys breathed like someone who had been underwater a little longer than he planned. "You do not hate me," he said a little wonderingly. "No," Oberyn said. "If I hated you, I would be careful with you. Hatred is attention. I am merely interested." Viserys laughed, and the laugh startled him, as if it were someone else's in his mouth. "I wanted it so much," he said. "The throne. It is a room in my head where there is nothing else." "You will have to furnish it," Oberyn said. "At the moment it is a chair in an empty room. Men are not impressed by empty rooms. They seek other rooms where the floor is dirty but there are stories in the corners." "How do I furnish it?" Viserys asked, almost like a boy. "Begin," Oberyn said, "by putting your sister in it in your mind." Viserys stopped as if tripped by something invisible. "What?" "You heard me," Oberyn said. "Imagine the chair. Imagine her in it. Not because you intend to give it to her, because you must know whether it can love her. If you can see it, then you will see more clearly how to go about taking it for yourself. If you cannot see it, then you do not want the chair. You want what you have wanted your whole life, to be paid the debt the world owes you for telling you no. Chairs are not good at paying debts. They are good at injuring men who sit badly." Viserys stared at him as if he had spoken a word that should not be said in the presence of men. His mouth worked and then was still. "You," he began, meaning insult and ending in bewilderment. "You think." "I do not think," Oberyn said mildly. "I am telling you how to proceed with your task. If you cannot imagine her in the chair, you cannot imagine the chair." Viserys looked toward the camp, where the fires were like the eyes of a creature that had decided not to eat them tonight. His face did something small and then large. He nodded. "All right," he said. He swallowed. "All right." When he left, he did so without demanding that the world notice his departure. Oberyn looked at the moon again and thought, perhaps this boy can be a bridge. Maybe a temporary one. Maybe one of the kind birds like to learn to perch on. He returned to his tent and did not sleep, because sleep is not always the useful thing to practice. The next day the sun dragged its skirts across everything and dared people to say the dress was not lovely. They rode. The day passed through its tasks without error. It was evening when Oberyn's expectation of danger finally met its appointment. A man on a cart pulled close to where Daenerys sat her horse and lifted a cask with a flourish that had killed other men. He was a wine seller this time, of course he was, with a smile that had grown fat on meetings with men who enjoy smiling. He had the right words and the right deference. The cask had the right weight in the hands. The breath of killing was there. Faint, the way a woman's perfume lingers in a room long after she has left and a husband returns and knows something without having to see it. Oberyn was already moving. He was practiced at appearing to be late and arriving in time. He took up the cask as a man does who intends to lift it because he is strong. He did not pretend. He turned it a little, talking with his hands about the weather as if he were an ant. He caught Yora's eye and tilted his own head in a way that Yora had learned to understand without enjoying. The wine seller smiled and described vineyards that do not exist and the pattern the grapes made in the spring. Like the backs of ladies, he said tastelessly. Oberyn undid the little seal with a thumbnail. He held the cask near his face but not too near and inhaled like a man more interested in seeing whether he recognized the countryside than the scent itself. He took Illyrio's bottle and did a thing with the oil that looked like a trick. It was a trick. He dipped a sliver of meat in a drop of the wine and let the oil ask it a question. The oil answered by darkening, subtly but definitely. He did not make a show of this. He set the cask down. He took the first cup and held it to the wine cellar. "You first," he said. The man laughed, because this is what men do when they intend to refuse and would like to create a scene in which refusal can thrive. He laughed again, up a shiver in pitch, and let his hand hover. He glanced at Daenerys and at Drogo and at Yora and at the ground. He made the mistake of thinking he could still find a way to put the cup down without having drunk. Yora took his arm into a shape it did not enjoy.
The men drunk.
He did not die immediately. Men rarely do. The body is loyal to itself first. His eyes changed their plan. He stood why still, and hoped the moment would punish someone else for a decision it knew he had made. Oberyn did not ask who sent him. He did not need a lie. He only wanted this. He wanted Daenerys to watch how a man dies when he has brought death as a gift and then been forced to open it himself. She watched. She did not flinch. She did not harden. She looked the way one looks at a poor thing on the road that you cannot help, and so you give it a blessing with your eyes and walk on. The man made the noises men make. He finished. He fell. The dust of his end melted into the place the Khalasar would lift when it left. Drogo looked at Oberyn. The look was not gratitude. It was not anger. It was the look two men exchange when they have each prevented the other from being made a fool. He nodded once. Oberyn nodded once. Yora's jaw unclenched and went immediately back to its place. Viserys had not seen it. He had been elsewhere admiring his anger and deciding which part of the world would be forced to wear it next. Daenerys did not call him to see the body. There are instructive moments one does not offer to people who will misread them for poems. They did not bury the wine cellar. They did not burn him. They left him to the animals that prefer meat that does not run. The men in the camp were quieter than usual that night. The women less so. Someone told a story about a snake that had swallowed a knife and learned to dispose of it by refusing to digest. Someone else told a story about a woman who had stopped loving a man and learned to tell him in a way that did not demand he feel hurt. The spear lay across Oberyn's knees and did not comment. He slept with the alert sleep of people who know they are useful. He woke before the first woman had decided to cook for men who would not thank her for it. He walked to where the horses snored very lightly and told the nearest one a secret so the day would begin with a joke. He stretched until his joints made modest confessions. He considered the sky. It offered nothing but itself. He accepted the offer and made ready to ride. Daenerys came to him without a herald. She does this, he thought, and it is her power. Her hair was braided now in a way that had made two old women argue and then agree. Her face had the dawn on it and did not apologize. "You saved my life," she said. "Yes," he said. "But that is not what matters." "What matters?" she asked. "That you understand that men will try to salt the ground around you and then sell you the water to make it green again," he said. "You will not buy it. You will dig your own well." "How?" she said, as if asking how one is supposed to be taller. By asking the people who bring you things to drink first, Oberyn said. By remembering the names of women who wash your hair and the names of their mothers. By learning when to say yes so that your no will land harder. By letting the horse believe it is your idea to run. By smiling at a man and meaning it and never smiling at that man again. By sleeping when you must and refusing to practice being dead the rest of the time. She listened until the words settled into her, then nodded. Will you ride with us always? She asked. Nothing rides with us always, Oberyn said. Not even breath. I will ride until the road says, here. She accepted this, not because she had been taught to accept what men said, but because the sentence had the ring of something the world would honor. If it did not, she would argue with it later. He saw that in her face and recognized a country. They rode again. The grass made its peace with hooves again. The sun again decided to make the day a place where men could live. The letter in Oberyn's belt was ashes now, but it made a shadow anyway. News always does. Somewhere to the west a king would laugh too loudly. Somewhere to the south a viper would writhe and not be killed. Somewhere to the north men would talk to trees. Here, a girl with pale hair was learning how to be the kind of queen who does not need a chair to be seen. When afternoon had warmed itself sufficiently, Drogo pulled them to a halt with that economy of motion that makes lesser men resent efficiency. He dismounted and walked away from his horse with the expression of a man who has decided to ask a question of himself in the presence of air. Daenerys looked after him because she has learned, quickly, that people tell you who they are when they think they are alone. Oberyn looked too, but without desire. He was studying Drogo's way of walking, which is one way men reveal where they will crack. The mountain rides, a passerby had said in the letter. Oberyn thought of that. The spear across his back told him he would attend to that matter in good time. He did not want to be hurried by fate or men. He wanted to be the thing that arrives at the necessary moment and opens a throat not because it is angry but because it is right. At sunset, they stopped near a stream that had been persuaded to be generous. Daenerys sat with her feet under her and drank and looked at the water as if it were reading her face back to her. Oberyn crouched and let the spear's weight remind his body that it had chosen this job and enjoyed it. A dragonfly landed on the spearhead and considered its reflection, and Oberyn smiled in approval. "Do you ever wish to be home?" she asked, not looking at him, which made the question larger. "Sometimes," he said, "but we mistake our bodies for our homes too often. I have carried Dorne in my mouth. I have tasted it on mornings when I have not been there. This is enough." She made a thoughtful noise. "I am not sure what my home tastes like," she said. "The first thing you choose for yourself that you are not punished for. That is the taste," Oberyn said. She nodded, and then did not ask another question. The sun put its hand on the backs of their necks in parting, and then withdrew before it could be shot for impertinence. The night arranged itself. In the dark, Varys thought of his webs, and Illyrio thought of his meals, and Doran thought of his brother, and Illyria thought of her hands. In the dark, a mountain put a boot into a stirrup. In the dark, swords under beds remembered their duty. In the dark, a boy in the Khalasar who had once stolen a horse dreamed of a city where the stones were hotter than bread and people spoke a language he could steal and make his own. In the dark, the spear named no names and asked its question again, and the world prepared itself, slowly, to answer.